Hello, everybody, and good evening. Welcome to another Twitter Space. I'm really this evening by some fantastic guests who I'm very shortly going to introduce you to. And we're here to have another really important topic this evening. We're going to be talking about the fact that it's Black History Month, and we're going to be talking a little bit around actually what that means, why it's important, and actually how people, face some stigma, discrimination, how people contribute to society, but actually is that a contribution overlooked, ignored? But obviously we're going to be thinking through the lens of living with dementia in this session this evening. So I'm going to tell you quickly how to use Twitter Spaces, just in case you don't know how to use it. My speakers have obviously already got speaker privileges, but we would like this session to be interactive. I'm not going to accept people coming up onto stage too soon, but about halfway through, I'll ask people to come up. So if you do want to come up and ask us a question this evening, if you're listening to the live space, please do that and come and join us. Obviously, if you're listening to the recording, if you're listening to this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this in Twitter over the next month, obviously you won't be able to interact with us. That's not a feature that's available if you're listening. But we welcome and I hope you enjoy our conversations this evening. So the other thing, just to let you know quickly, is that how to request the mic. So if you do want to join us later on to have a conversation, you've got the ability to request the mic. And you do that by pressing the little button down to the left of your screen that says request. As I say, the mics aren't open yet, so you won't be able to do that. But if you do want to request the mic later on, join us in the conversation. That's where you'll be able to do that, and we'll bring you up so that you can speak to guests. The other thing, just to let you know, if you want to, is up at the top, you'll be able to see three little dots next to the leave button. Obviously, please don't press the leave. Those three little dots will allow you to turn captions on, which means if you want to listen to the transcript of our conversation, because that helps you, that's a feature that's there that you can use. If not, I'm going to move on now and introduce my guests to you this evening. So, as I said, I'm really delighted that we're here and having this conversation, and I'm also very delighted that we've got some fantastic speakers. So, I'm going to invite Paulette. If you can just quickly say who you are and where you work, and a little bit about yourself, that would be great, please.
So hello, and I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you beautifully, Paulette. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Paulette Winchester-Joseph, and I'm a service development consultant admiral nurse at Dementia UK. I have been an admiral nurse for about 15 years now, but I've been qualified as a nurse for over about 20 years now. So my speciality at Dementia UK is looking after families affected from a diverse and underserved background.
Thank you very much, Paulette. And Paulette has actually, this is her second Twitter space that you've done with us. So not only have you done one, but you've come back again. So thank you for doing that, Paulette. Our next guest who's joining me as a speaker this evening is somebody who I'm really pleased is here with us. On his profile picture, it says a box of smiles, and I'm sure he's going to tell you a little bit more about that. But Ronald, would you like to just quickly say who you are and a little bit about you, please?
As you just said, yes, my name is Ronald. I'm a dementia diarist, having been diagnosed with dementia 2 years following sustaining a brain injury after a stroke. Very much into art and music, and there's so much more to me than I can say in a few seconds. But I'm really glad to be here, and every day I find life an amazing place to be.
Thank you so much. And I know that you're going to tell us loads more about all of the amazing stuff you've been doing. And honestly, stick around if anybody, because it is amazing, some of the stuff you've done. So, Ronald, I'm going to start off with Paulette, if that's okay, because I'd like Paulette to help set the scene for us a little bit. And then I really want you to come in and tell us the absolute reality and all of the amazing stuff that you've been doing. So that means you can sit back and enjoy your cup of tea and just listen to Paulette and I having a conversation for a while. So, Paulette, can I start off by asking you what might sound like a pretty obvious question in lots of ways, but when we talk about people from an African Caribbean heritage or community, what do we actually mean? What people are we talking about?
So, in short, we're talking about Black Africans, Black Caribbeans. So the term African Caribbean, it usually refers to people with African ancestral origins who migrated via the Caribbean islands. So African Caribbean people descend from disparate groups of African people who were bought, sold, and taken from West Africa as slaves to the colonial Caribbean. For the UK, I think the most significant wave of migration came after the Second World War, and it coincided with the decolonization era and the dissolution of the British Empire. And that generation is known as the Windrush generation. So I'm sure a lot of people here have heard about the Windrush generation. Um, and the population has a diverse backgrounds and origins in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm from, St. Kitts and Nevis, Barbados, Grenada, Antigua, and lots of Caribbean islands in Vincent and the Grenadines, Guyana, Belize. Um, so it's really a wide and diverse sort of population that we're talking about.
Thanks, Paulette. Can I ask you to just say a little bit more about Windrush, just in case people don't actually know much about that or what that is?
Okay, so the Windrush, when in the 1948, they saw the arrival of the HMT Empire Windrush. It came in at the Tilbury dock from the Caribbean, and so there were people coming to help rebuild Britain after the post-World War, and so they were taken from Caribbean islands, like I said, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, really to come and support what they refer to. They often refer to in that time as the motherland. So they were coming here to specifically to help build back Britain.
And I think I asked you to clarify that because I think that's so important that people fully understand that. We're talking about the Second World War. And these people came to rebuild, and actually the NHS was just starting at that time, wasn't it? So we're talking about people who built the NHS as well, who were very important. And how many people came over as part of the Windrush generation? Do you know that stat?
So perhaps for that Empire Windrush, there was about 802 people on board that one, but there were many people that came just before, and definitely a lot more after.
Mm. And I guess the percentage of people in terms of sex, was it mostly men or mostly women, or what was that kind of demographic like? Do you know?
I think I'm not exactly sure of the demographic, but it would have been families and predominantly men leaving
Hmm.
the women and children at home to come and build a better life in
Hmm.
order, and the intention was to go back after a few years, and some did actually go back, but a lot of people stayed and brought their families afterwards after they started building a better life for themselves.
So, I mean, that's really important, isn't it? Well, that people came here to do this amazing job and actually stayed as well. And in terms of where people settled, I know that, obviously Birmingham's got a large group of people have settled in Birmingham. And I know, of course, across London, it's divided up into lots of different areas and different pockets. But whereabouts did people settle in the UK?
I think it's really dispersed because they settled in what they call sort of like the major city areas. So according to the 2011 census, for example, Birmingham was home of the largest Black Caribbean population, followed by Croydon, Lewisham, Lambeth, Brent, and Hackney. So it's very broad and very diverse.
Mhm.
There isn't a specific UK census category which comprehensively covers the community, but population numbers remain somewhat ambiguous.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of population, do we know what percentage of people we're actually talking about in that demographics? Is it because when I was looking, I was coming up with stats that were saying it was under 1% of the UK population. Is that correct, or are those figures a bit out of date?
The figures are probably hugely outdated now, and the figures are now coming through for the 2021 census. So I wouldn't want to go too much into speculating the exact numbers, but we can always get that. And if people are interested in that statistics, we can always find that out and send it through.
Thank you for thinking through where people are at in terms of their age and their demographic. Am I right again in thinking that the largest group of people are now going to be over 55? Is that correct? Or again, am I wrong? And I'm just trying to put this into a dementia perspective here. Obviously, this is what we're talking about this evening. So, what do we know about people's ages, or do we know that information?
If we looked at the people that came around the Windrush Empire and in 1948, you'll be looking at people perhaps going into their 90s
Yeah,
now.
much older.
But if they even as if they came as babies, or they'll be in their 70s, 74, 75 now. And age is our most significant risk factor when we're looking at dementia. We have 1 in 14 people over the age of 65 will have a dementia. When it gets to about 80, going up to that age range, is 1 in 6. And some statistics say it's 1 in 4 people will have a dementia if they're approaching that age. So it's a significant amount of people. So we have to, at the moment, in 2013, there was a research that was done, and it was 25,000 people at that count. Living with dementia from ethnically diverse communities, and not necessarily only Black and African and Black Caribbean. And that figure was expected to double to 50,000 by 2026. So we're dealing with a significant amount of people living with dementia.
And I guess so. One of the things that we know, isn't it, that across the UK, that people from Black, African, Caribbean backgrounds are often developing dementia younger as well. We do see that. I know, and it's something that we've talked about in the past. And I guess when we look at the statistics and the figures that you've shared, we also know that amongst South Asian groups, there's a large increase. Of course, we're not here to talk about this evening. We do have a space on that as that we did in August, actually, as part of the South Asian Heritage Month. But actually, we also know, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, please do, that people are often less likely to perhaps receive drug treatments, take part in research, maybe get the care that they need, and even getting the diagnosis. We don't really know much about how people perceive that diagnosis or the treatment. Is that all fair assessment or a summary, or would you like to add anything to where I've just said and all of that?
So in the Black community, there's a high incidence of risk factors such as diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, and this increases the risk of developing dementia. And individuals within this community also, they're at greater risk of experiencing poor health associated with the socioeconomic circumstances throughout their life and in older age. And this can increase the risk of cognitive impairment and dementia as well. So there's some of the communities also, there is the understanding and knowledge about dementia is often quite low. So there's some myths and taboos attached to the condition. As with all dementia in all communities, there's stigma, but there's also a higher level of stigma associated with the condition within these communities. On the flip side of that, there is a lack of culturally sensitive dementia services for this community as well.
I was just going to ask you that. So you've just kind of led us beautifully into the next question, which was actually going to be around services, because I know in terms of the screening tools, the diagnostic tools that are available, they're not always appropriate. They're not relevant all the time, and they and also you mentioned taboo earlier, but in terms of the support services that are available, what do you know about, have you come across many services, or what can you share with us about what local communities have done
So the
to support people?
communities, I find that the communities that has really strive to address the imbalance in these communities are the communities that use alternative approaches. So they think outside the box. They're much more innovative. They go through perhaps, say, for example, community centers, faith groups. They go to faith leaders. They use link workers. They use the voluntary sector a lot more to bring out and so the people feel that they can embrace and they can use these methods as opposed to waiting for the very last minute when there's nothing else that we can do, when they're at absolute crisis. And that's the statistics that's coming through. They wait until it's really, really late in the day, when we know that early diagnosis, there's lots of opportunities. There's opportunities for to help them live a better quality of life, and so they don't access those because whether it's a stigma, whether there's a reluctance to ask for and accept formal support, where there's an element of trust with how they've been treated within the socioeconomic pathways, and into themselves. Sometimes there is, and I've heard it as a child, once a man, twice a child. There's a saying that it's almost normalizing. This is what's expected when you get older, but that's an absolute myth, and those are the things that we need to correct in order to address some of the access barriers for these diverse and underserved communities.
Thank you. You're so right, and I think it is about raising awareness and changing that perception and breaking down that stigma. It's so important that we have these conversations. And while you were talking, Paulette, I was thinking about this phrase that used to be used, and I'm saying used to be used confidently, but I'm sure we still hear it, where people talk about harder to reach groups or communities, and that's a term I personally really don't like, because I think it implies blame on the person you're trying to serve, the community themselves, rather than questioning why your service or your organisation isn't actually accessible to people.
Yeah.
And I mean, is that still a term that gets used? Do you know? It's not one I've heard. Well, actually, I have heard quite recently. I was going to say I haven't, but are we
So
still
it's,
using
I think
language like that?
we're discouraging it as in every avenue that we can possibly discourage it. So we are saying, and we get asking people to get the message across. They're not harder to reach. What we are doing is we're not providing the services in a way that matches their needs. So not necessarily harder to reach. Perhaps terms such as often unseen, often unheard, those perhaps are more kinder terms.
Yeah.
Because if you're asking me about if I've grown up in the Caribbean and I'm an older person, I'm 80 years old, and you're asking me about what happened in the UK way back then, of course I won't know.
Yeah. It's true, isn't it? And I think that's I like the often unheard is a better term, isn't it? If you want to think about that, but and it's just one that whenever I hear anybody describe harder to reach communities, it just drives me potty, and that's very much something that I'm pleased to hear that we've got some alternatives to that kind of language now, and you are absolutely right about that those culturally appropriate tools, and it has I'm not aware, but you may well be, and you're the best person to tell me, is there any particular toolboxes or tools that have been developed that you're aware of?
I think Ronald would probably come into his own in some of the tools that we use, and some of the um, reminiscence to
Oh, I wasn't
as
meaning
for you.
reminiscence ones, Paulette. Sorry, I was meaning around the sort of diagnostic tools or anything like that. Do you know if there was anything like that?
Not specifically. It's perhaps using more. Um, the diagnostic tools that's more relatable. So, for example, if you, as minor as a clock drawing sounds,
Mm-hmm.
a clock is universal. So, people, wherever you're from, you'd know what a clock looks like, and it's an assessment tool that they use quite regularly when they're assessing for dementia and trying to work out where the deficits are. So if you ask someone to draw a clock and put the numbers in, put the hand on the numbers to indicate that it is 10 minutes past 11 o'clock, for example, universally those kind of tools would be acceptable, as opposed to saying, they don't know who the prime minister was, or they don't know who the prime minister was at the time of the Second World War. They don't know when the Second World War ended. Using tools that doesn't matter where the person is more
It's
diagnostically
going to work better, isn't it?
suitable.
And I must admit, these days, knowing the prime minister and the monarch, let's yeah,
I was trying to stay
it,
away from that.
yeah, I know it's quite hard. It makes it much harder in terms of some of the questions we might ask. So I want to just focus you, if I can, because I know last time you joined us, we were talking about what we've been doing at Dementia UK, and I don't want this to be a huge part of our conversation because I'm sure everybody else joins me in being desperate to hear from Ronald as well. But actually, in terms of the Black History Month, obviously we know that the kind of strapline is time for change and action, not words, and that's certainly the strapline we've got in the UK. I know in America it's a different strapline, different time of the year, but that's the strapline in the UK. So can you tell me a little bit more about actually what we've been doing at Dementia UK to try and improve our diversity, or the current picture of where we're at in the Dementia UK?
So I think for me, the Dementia UK and its present is probably the fundamental aspect and the ethos of Dementia UK is the provision of Admiral nurses. And Admiral nurses are well placed to support families living with dementia from diverse and underserved communities, all sub-communities throughout the UK and abroad. So what we've done is we've we've had the EDI consultant, and I say EDI, and I'm just Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion consultant, join us, and we're asking that person for specific guidance around developing our strategy, our dementia strategy, and our EDI strategy, um, to tackle. To be specific and appropriate, and making sure that what we're doing is taking positive action and being culturally sensitive to the needs of the people that we serve. So we're looking at the Admiral nurses and we're drawing out. We've got a body of diversity champions network, and these are people who are passionate about improving the experience of dementia for people living with dementia and the families from diverse and underserved communities throughout. We've had a benchmark survey that we completed last year, and that was given us to give us a picture of how diverse we as a community of Admiral nurses are. That resulted in almost matching the population as it was. We weren't as diverse as we would want to be, but we've made a start, and we're doing a lot more along those lines in order to improve that picture. We've recently appointed diverse lead nurses in Leicester City, in one of the GP practices, as a GP practice that covers four GP across the area. And we've also done that within the Black Country, within the Wolverhampton, one of the areas that covers the Black Country. So it covers Wolverhampton, Dudley, Warsaw, and Sandwell. So, and we're working with those communities because the West Midlands, the Midlands is the second most diverse, apart from London, diverse area of the UK. So we're trying to bridge the gap and get more nurses out there, get more engagement with the communities, asking the key stakeholders, the parties involved, what is it that we can do to make the experience better, to improve the quality of life of diverse and underserved communities living with dementia.
Thank you so much, Paulette, for all of your information this evening. It's been Paulette and I work quite closely together, but it's always a joy to hear you talking about a subject that you're so knowledgeable and passionate about. So thank you so much for your time. Obviously, don't leave us, because we may want to come to you and ask you some questions in a little bit. But I'm going to thank you again, and then I'm going to ask Ronald very soon to come and join us. And I'm also going to, at this point, very soon open up the speakers. So if you do want to open up the mic, sorry. So if you do want to join us and ask a question, you'll be able to do that as well, and interact with us in the space. So, Ronald, I'm just going to introduce you again by saying something that you didn't share earlier on. Ronald was recently a joint winner of an award, which was an exceptional contribution by a person living with dementia at the 12th National Dementia Care Awards. And I know that that was really recently. And I think that the fact that you were nominated for that award, and you I know you joint won it actually, didn't you, Ronald, with Chris Maddox, who some of you may remember because she spoke in our Twitter Spaces when we were talking about Lewy bodies. But I just wanted to congratulate you, Ronald, for that, and check that you're still able to speak and everything's working your end.
Yeah, your voice is a bit low, but if you can hear me, okay, I'm happy.
We can hear you beautifully, and I'm sorry. I'll try and make sure that I speak nice and close to the mic for you, so that
No,
you.
I can hear you, but
Perfect.
it's a bit low, but I can hear you sufficiently.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. As I said, I'm really really pleased that you're here, and because the work that you're doing, and just by living with your diagnosis is really making a difference. So congratulations again for that award, and thank you for joining us. Can I ask you to start off, please, by telling us a little bit about you and your background? Is that something you can tell everybody a little bit about?
Yeah, I'd like to just quickly say, the lady who just spoke, is it Paulette?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah,
Is she a nurse?
she is. She's one of our
She's an
admins.
amazing nurse, I
Yeah.
suspect, and the way she communicated and shared her conversation, the things she was saying were so spot on and so greatly beautiful for me to hear it being echoed the way she was saying it. So thank you.
I'm sure Paulette's blushing.
Thank you, but I am blushing.
I knew you would.
Um,
Oh,
a little
thank
bit of my experience.
you. Yes, please.
Um,
So let's just back
well,
you and your background.
my background. Well, I was born in England. Um, I grew up as a child who would always fall into conflict with the system, so to speak. From a very early age, I'd constantly be in trouble at school. Then I ended up again at a very early age falling into conflict with the so-called criminal justice system. So I ended up being sent to reform school. They used to have a thing called Borstal back then, and prison. So I went through that world, and then it got to a stage when I was in my teens, and I thought my life was going to be an indefinite journey of incarcerations.
Mm.
Somebody gave me the opportunity to start making records and producing artists. And I went from a child or a teenage young man who was always in conflict with the world or the system to being a record producer. And then I became a community worker working with young disaffected um, people
Mhm.
in Harlesden. And then we ended up working with the police, running pirate radio stations, supported by Brent Council. So my life went from one extreme to another extreme.
Mhm.
And then it ended up in another extreme, which was when I sustained a stroke. And 2 years after the stroke, which left me with a brain injury, I was diagnosed with onset of dementia, they called it, and
Mhm.
put on something called donepezil, a drug, and told I just needed to take life easy, not do too much. And that for me was another turnaround in
Mm-hmm.
my life when I really started to appreciate life more than ever.
And
Strangely enough, the
can I?
diagnosis took me to another level
Yeah.
of life.
And how old were you at that point, Ronald?
When I got the diagnosis, I was in my 50s.
So a young man when that happened. And you said that you were told to take it easy. Was that was the advice you were given? So actually, and also you mentioned then that when you received the diagnosis, it brought you to another stage of life. So can I ask you a little bit about that? So once you received this diagnosis, what was the main impact that it had? How did you feel at that point?
Well, when I got the diagnosis, um, for a while, quite a while, I questioned it
Hmm.
because that's my nature to question things. And I went through a long period of questioning the diagnosis and getting it to be rechecked and rechecked, MRI scans and all these different tests. And while I was trying to really understand what the diagnosis was, because I was resistant to what I thought was because my whole understanding of dementia was someone who was incapable of doing much. They were
Hmm.
fragile, they were broken. I remember my mom, she had dementia, and she got to the stage where she couldn't eat, she couldn't talk, and she ended up in a coma. And I couldn't visualize myself as being any of that because
Hmm.
felt, or I still felt full of aspirations and hopes for life, for the future. Um,
Yeah.
so I didn't angle it, I didn't cope with it too well at the time. And I was going to a place called Edway for other health issues, which I had. Um,
Hmm.
but it got to, I'm feeling nervous. I don't know why I'm feeling
Oh
nervous.
no, sorry.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
it's a funny thing doing this, and you're absolutely breaking boundaries and again, and and actually everything you've done has been about that kind of amazing contribution. The fact that you're doing this in Twitter Spaces, where so many people still don't know about Twitter Spaces, what this whole thing is about, having these conversations. So give honestly, I'm sending you so much love, and don't be nervous. You're doing brilliantly, telling your story, and how you felt, and it's something emotional that we're talking about on a really weird way. So honestly, I'm sending you love. You're doing great. Uh,
Okay. What was the question? Your last question you
so
asked me?
you were just talking about how it felt when you received that diagnosis, and you talked about that questioning it and seeking clarification, and you spoke a little bit about your mother and your previous understanding. So I guess from what you've said, it sounds like your understanding of dementia was very different to how you felt in your reality. Is that a sort of summary of how you felt, or what would you say around that?
Absolutely. But what, absolutely, you're correct. My understanding of dementia was totally different from, I couldn't relate that diagnosis to the person who I was,
Hmm.
um, who was living life at the time with so much enthusiasm for life. To be told suddenly my existence was to be reliant on medication
Yeah.
and being very kind of almost dormant, very tranquil and just sitting around doing not very much.
Yeah.
And
And in
then
terms, sorry, go on.
sorry,
I was just going to say, in terms of the support that you had. So I know that you said they gave you some medication and they gave you the diagnosis, but did they do anything else? Do you know at that point?
no, not really. I feel, and I saw, for quite a while, I was on the battlefield I've been on so many battlefields in life, like
Mhm.
many other people, but I was definitely on the battlefield with my local council and support services, and I ended up being defined as a problem.
Mhm.
And I'd argue with people. I was known to be very argumentative. I was defined as being aggressive in some of the communications I got from the local council. Um, and I went through, I think, an extended period of being excluded by the council and local support services and being known as a problem in my
Mhm.
local area. And I went through that for I went through that for quite a while, and I think it resulted in me also being excluded from the type of care that I
Mhm.
needed. And in fact, I know that I was excluded. I think if you're not subservient to to the expectations or the requirements of some support services, social workers, um, social services, um, if you have a
Mhm.
conflict with your local council and they know you got health issue, your social worker will end up colluding with the local council, and you'll end up being almost penalized for just trying to live.
Yeah.
And I recognize that
Yeah, it's so
I,
difficult,
yeah,
isn't it? Because actually, I think services in general aren't very well set up for young men. You know, and if you're in your 50s when you were diagnosed, and I think in general, you know, we've still got an awful lot to improve in terms of the services that are in place to support somebody in their 50s living with dementia. You know, they're not as good as they could be. There's room for improvement, let's say, and you know, and actually, if you're looking for support, you're looking for something that to make your life easier and better for you, and to enable you to live well, and you would expect that the services are there, wouldn't you? So I can see how you could end up in that conflict because actually, you know, you're not getting access to services, and it's actually perhaps because there just isn't any services there at all. You know, that's part of the problem. So I guess at the point of diagnosis, having more support would have helped, to help you understand and work through that diagnosis. Is that correct?
I think I'm going to contradict myself in saying that I did get support and
Mhm.
I got amazing support. In fact, a social worker came into my life and saved my life
Oh,
because
that's
I was
good.
falling apart. I was for like literally 2 years. I was living in a house with no eating, no hot water, no cooker, and I thought I was all right. And the Stroke Association also came into my world, and an
Mhm.
organization called Penrose came into my world, and a group of support services, some people from Edway, they
Mhm.
all stubbornly would not leave me alone. They were convinced that they're going to try to support me and help me back and get me back on track again.
Mhm.
So it's like I had two experiences.
Yeah.
I had one experience where I was in constant, serious battle with the local council for lots of other reasons, which I
Mhm.
won't go into now. Um, I also had some amazing support from places where you may not have expected it to come
Mhm.
from,
Oh,
but
well,
it
that's
came into my life. So, and I'm not complaining. And the
oh
journey of the ups and downs, even the bad experiences, they've also, now in hindsight, turned out to be beautiful experiences for me, for the way
well,
I feel and the way I think. And
that's
I
good to
also
hear.
know I'm not the only person who goes through these experiences. So it's not specific to me
Yeah.
to the extent that I could say that it was totally cultural misunderstanding,
Mhm.
which was my belief, or discrimination, which again was was again my belief. I think it was just was that it's also some of these services or some of the understandings that the services have are so out of date, and they provide their services from a textbook which isn't fresh. They need to think freshly about
Yeah.
how they deal with people.
Make sure they're up to date is so important. So
Mm.
I'm going to ask you another question now, but I'm glad to hear that you that sorry to you had that trouble getting the support, but also glad to hear you did get some support as well. So what I'm going to ask you now is I'm going to remind you. You said that when you received the diagnosis, they said take it easy, and everything I know about you is that you kind of haven't done that actually in some ways, because you have been breaking new ground around raising the profile of people, doing all sorts of amazing things with your time. And can you tell us a little bit more about some of the amazing things that you've done since you've got this diagnosis? Because I think this just changes that perception. And you talked about your mum and how what your perception was like beforehand. But I think everybody who's listened to you this evening will know that that's very definitely not you. So can you tell us a little bit about Box of Smiles, perhaps to start with?
Well, I, I always find it amazing when people say I do amazing things, because I don't see it as amazing. I see what I do is I'm constantly fighting for life and striving adventurously to be a part of life in a way that it makes me happy. So most of the things I do revolves around the lion, if I could say that, the lion in me continuously wanting to breathe and to roam around and to be I've got something in me pushes me to aspire to be more than someone who's prepared to be reliant on services. And
Absolutely, hallelujah to you. That's the way
and
to live life, isn't it?
yeah, and that has resulted in me doing things which people look on as being like really outstanding. But there's nothing really outstanding about it. It's just me writing songs and sharing my thoughts and feelings through music and poetry, which for me is a more comfortable way for me to communicate. Like I'm having a conversation with you now that I'm not comfortable with. But if I could have that conversation through writing my thoughts and feelings and translating them through music, um, I think I'd articulate myself more clearer.
And I know that you do that, don't you? Because I've read some of your poems and your poetry and the music that you've produced, and I think I get that that's the more kind of readily available medium for you to use. And I'm just going to share a message. So we've just had a message from somebody called Jude who's listening tonight, and they've sent you a message saying you are doing really well. So thank you for being in the space and thank you for sharing. So even though you kind of say it's a bit outside of your comfort zone at times, you honestly you are doing really well. So I'm just like to share that quick message of support that's come in for you, because you are doing amazing. So Box of Smiles, what is that, Ronald?
The box of smiles is when I was in hospital, the nurses used to. Um, First of all, I love the fact that I grew up the way I did because it made me very rebellious and very stubborn and the type of person that would always stand up for what he felt was not right. Um, and when I was in hospital, I had a stroke, and now for 3 days, no, for 4 days, they didn't give me an MRI scan. And even though I couldn't walk, and even though I was sick, and even though I was in the stroke unit, for some reason I didn't get an MRI scan, and that resulted in me kind of arguing with them kind of arguing with me. And after on the sixth day, they decided to give me an MRI scan because my daughter said she wasn't going to leave the hospital until I got the MRI scan.
Mm.
And then they realized that it was really serious, and they should have done it within seconds of me coming into the hospital or when they earlier. And after 6 days of really arguing with the hospital, we they and them really seeing me as a problem in that ward, they changed their attitude towards me, and they'd come up to me and say, "Hello, young Ronald, why don't you smile?" Because I was serious, and they said, "Come on, give us a smile, give us a smile," and I was so serious. But the smile agenda became like something more than just a conversation. As soon as I got out of hospital, within 2 weeks, I took my sister into the studio and we recorded a track called Smile because I wanted to smile again. And I realized how important and how beautiful it made me feel when I distracted the sadness and then and the really difficult emotions I was going through when I was doing something enjoyable like a smile. And I sought to evolve that, and I started to to um to I started to always tell people to smile, and we evolved people that old idea of a smile for well-being and everything into something I made into a little project with the support of the Alzheimer's Society. Um, and that's how it came around. I was depressed. I seldom smile. People would tell me to smile, nurses. Um, and we've now developed it into a project whereby we think it is such a beautiful thing to do for therapy. And I can testify to that because it's a therapy I needed at a time when I often would have tears in my eyes.
It's
Um,
it's so
yeah, so it's where
important.
we invite people to write a few lines about a smile. What does a smile mean to you?
I'm trying to think of when do you know what, when I see somebody smile, I think it feels warm is probably the first word that it means to me. It's that sense of warm comfort, some sort of recognition. And I'm smiling at my phone while you're talking. I know you can't see me because of the platform we're using, but it's so important, isn't it? What does it mean to you, Paulette? When you think of smiling?
Well, if anyone knows me, I'm always smiling. It draws me back to what I was mentioning just earlier. I want to give people the opportunity to speak in the space, but I kind of looked at the time. But for me, I think what happens is that it draws me back to a tool we often use with people living with dementia and the carers, in the reminiscence. We always use music, and we have people who don't say much, don't say much at all. And if we use something like music, I remember my last session in a community center, we all started singing that Bob Marley and the Wailers, Three Little Birds. And it was that, don't worry. My singing's not great.
I love
Not
it that
a
you're singing
thing. Because every little thing is gonna be all right. And honestly, every people started joining in, and it was the mood changes. So music and smiling and reminiscing, that is all part and parcel of looking after people and improving their quality of life.
I am really smiling now because I didn't. And your singing is good.
Excuse me.
Go on,
Excuse me.
go on, Ronald. The floor's
Is it
yours.
possible that I can give that lady a recording contract?
Oh,
Yes,
sign me
I
up.
think 100% you need to do that. Oh, it's amazing. But you know what? You've led us into. We're smiling, we're laughing, we've started off having a conversation, we're now giggling our heads off. So thank you, Ronald. You've done amazing, man. It is so important. I am also just going to remind people that the mics are open. So if you do want to join us, we've only got about 10 minutes left. These spaces go so quickly. But if anybody listening in the space now does want to join us and either sing for us if you want to do that, tell us a poem, ask a question of Paulette or of Ronald, of anything you've heard this evening, or indeed, of course, of myself. Anything you've heard, feel free to request the mic. So just to remind you how you do that, there's the little button down at the bottom that you can request the mic and come and join us. And I have seen people putting in the chat that they're also feeling a bit nervous. Hey, we're all, that's how this makes you feel at times. But actually, it's a conversation. We're just chatting on the phone, so don't worry at all. And I've had a couple of people request the mic, so I'm going to invite them to come up and speak. The first person who asked them for the mic, I think, was L Block 2, I believe. So you should be. Oh, I think they've
Hello.
gone.
It's Sharon.
hello.
Hello.
Sharon, hi. Thank you for joining us,
Hi.
Sharon.
Hi, Ronald. It's how
Hiya.
do you remember me, Sharon, from years ago? The one with the smile. Did the video? Did your support plan? Norman's friend.
Yeah, I remember you. You were one of the most amazing people in my life
That's
back
why you
then.
got that
I
right
forgot
then.
to
You
mention
remembered.
you. Of course I do. We went to the studio in Acton.
Yes, that's right. I did a recording. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, you were one of the amazing people I met back then also. Yeah, I forgot all about you.
That's all right. You're allowed. I've just
And you know I was always arguing with the system. Do you remember?
absolutely, and I always supported you on that. Shh, don't
Yeah.
tell anyone.
Isn't that great though? We're putting old friends back in touch with each other this way.
I just came across this just going through Twitter and looking through my feed, and this just popped up as a space was there, and I saw that Ronald was going to be on, so I thought I'd come and eavesdrop and see what was going on. But it is so amazing to hear the power of music, but also about it being specific to Afro-Caribbean communities, because I think what gets missed a lot of the time is that music gets pulled out as it's the same tunes for everybody, but different music connects with different communities. And it's so nice to know that Ronald has got a space now to make it more understandable and connect culturally with other groups. And it's just really, really lovely to hear. I'm so pleased it's off the ground, Ronald.
Oh.
I wish you'd spoken earlier, then I would have been much more calmer. Because suddenly I feel calm and gentle.
Oh no, well, thank you so much for joining us. And you're so right that, music has to be, it has to be the right music, doesn't it? It has to be appropriate. It has to be, but also the music you like, because, somebody could look at me and decide I should like, I'm sorry if there's any Spice Girls fans listening, that they could go, oh, that's the music she's going to really like, because, no, I don't. I never did. So, it wouldn't be appropriate to me and it wouldn't be person centered to me. So it's about making things individual and, as well. And Ronald, you've got a radio show that you still do, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got to. Funny enough, I'm just remembering that lady who just spoke. She was like significant in my recovery. She did my care plan, I think. Once she got me 2 PAs that I had. I forgot all about her. I got to send her a dedication on my radio show.
For sure. What song would you like, Sharon? What would you like?
Whatever Ronald chooses, I'd be happy with.
3 Little Birds.
Absolutely would be. Yeah, or One Love.
Oh yes, please. That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Can you tell everybody about your radio show, Ronald? How do people access that? Because I'm guessing we all now want to listen to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I do. I'm a part. Fortunately, in fact, I'm quite fortunate, because when I speak, it might sound like I'm upset or I'm frustrated or angry with the world. I'm not at all. I'm so grateful for where I am at the moment. And I do a radio show on a station called Deepness Dementia Radio. It's just music, really. It's music therapy, I call it. And I don't talk much because, as I said before, I think I lack the confidence to really say too much in conversation. But I do play music. So a station called Deepness Dementia Radio in Scotland. and K-Bit Play. And it's just a show where you just play beautiful music. And I do it to counteract boredom. I get bored very easy. And I do it because I just love doing things that have got the potential to grow. So hopefully I'll start talking soon. I'll start doing interviews, and my show will be something that people will use as a platform to share positive conversations around health issues mainly.
Yeah, I think you should so do that, because actually you've talked so beautifully tonight. You've been such a great guest in this space. So, I absolutely think if you're comfortable with it, incorporating some of your wonderful voice would be really good. And actually, I was reading one of your poems that you've penned, because you're fantastic at that, and as well. So I think you've got so many talents that you need to share them with people. People need to have access to you, and be able to do that. And we have had a conversation about even potentially getting a bit of a book of poetry out there, haven't we? Because I know that you produced some fantastic poems as well.
Yeah, as I just like to say something else. What I learned when I got my diagnosis and they prescribed medication, I wish they had prescribed um something like Ronald, understand the diagnosis, learn about it,
Mm.
and remember there's someone's calling me.
Oh.
And
That's the thing, doing things live, but well done for
if
staying with
if I wish they had actually prescribed something like go and have a great time, live cautiously, but you can continue to live and continue to have aspirations because it's
Yeah.
only onset of dementia, early onset of dementia. So you've still got your life ahead of you if you live it well.
Yeah, you're so right, and I think actually that's a beautiful thing to make sure that everybody hears, because a diagnosis of dementia, it doesn't actually mean you have to start taking it slowly, or relaxing and just taking these tablets, and people can do all sorts of things, that whatever they want really, once they've got this diagnosis, providing that that their body's able, and they're safe. Why not? And I was talking to somebody recently who was telling me about the fact that she was going wing walking, through on top of the plane, to raise awareness about the fact that people with dementia can do whatever they want. They can write poetry. They can, start do radio shows, talk in Twitter Spaces. All of these things. It doesn't mean that because you've got this diagnosis, you've got to sort of just take tablets and sit quietly. And so I think, all credit to you for absolutely everything you've done to kind of change that perception around actually what dementia might be, and what it might not be as well. I think is important. Can I ask you, because we're really coming up towards the end of the space now, can I ask you if one thing that you would like people to know, and because I guess I've just done my one thing, and I've kind of pinched yours a bit, haven't I? So I'm really mindful. You might just want to say no what Vic said, but in terms of what do you want people to know at the end of this space, if you can give them one message to take with them, what would it be?
Um, in respect of myself, I
Hmm.
think the most beautiful part of my life, if I was to document it as a story, I'd say the beautiful chapters in my life, when all is said and done, they came into play when I got diagnosed with onset of dementia. Because I started to look at life differently, appreciate it differently, appreciate love and all the things that I took for granted. So the diagnosis can be a really amazing turning point as long as you understand what it is.
I love that. Honestly, I love that. Yeah, I'm in my emotions listening to you there, because that's yeah, perfect. Thank you, Paulette. Can I ask you the same question? What was what one thing would you like people to take with them after this space?
I probably would just echo what Ronald just said about getting a diagnosis of dementia. Don't be frightened by a diagnosis of dementia. Don't be too overwhelmed if it happens. Accept it, embrace it, and let think of it as an opportunity for you to have a say in how you want your future to be, in how you want your life to pan out. And it gives you the opportunity to do that and to be as involved as you possibly want could be at that time.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Ronald, can I ask your permission? And I'm putting you on the spot. Feel free to say no. Can I read out one of your poems?
Yeah, of course, that's a pleasure. I wouldn't say no to that. I love it.
Well, I knew I'm putting you on the spot there, but I was reading one earlier that I just thought was really beautiful, and I know that we're really up against the time, but I'm just going to want to read this out. And I hope I do it okay. So I'm nervous now. So the poem that Ronald wrote is: sometimes I just want to talk. Sometimes I just want to listen. Sometimes I just want to cry. And then again, sometimes I just want to smile. Be patient and ask me why. And don't be surprised when you get a reply. Sometimes I just want to shout out, I'm still me, can't you see? And that's the end of the poem. So I just wanted to read that because I think it kind of captures everything that we've been talking about, and reminds people to smile and and to be patient. So I hope I did your poem justice in my reading.
Could I say so quickly, that poem was written along with a lady called Chris Maddox. We wrote it jointly about 2 years ago when we first met.
I didn't know that, and I admire Chris tremendously. So, sorry, I'm losing my voice. So that makes it even more beautiful because there's two people who wrote that poem that I just love it. I think it's so important, and wanted to kind of just share that with people this evening. So, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you very much, Sharon, for joining us and taking Ronald down that trip down memory lane as well, and for everything that you did to help him. Thank you everybody for listening. Obviously, if you're listening to the recording later on and you want to get in touch with Ronald, it's a box of smiles. Obviously, for Dementia UK, you've got the details there to follow people and connect with people again after the space. Our next session that we're doing is going to be in November, and in November we're going to be talking about medication management and dementia. But that's all for us this evening. We've come to the end of our hour. I hope you've enjoyed the space. I'm going to thank you, Paulette and Ronald, again for joining us, and thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you massively, Ronald. Thank you massively, Paulette.
Thank you. Most welcome.
Thank you. I hope it was okay. I'm going to end the space very shortly, but thank you both.